Let me tell you about the 60s, alright? The West exploded, almost literally, with entertainment, technology, war, drugs, music, and mustaches. That's just the USA. The entire world was going through big changes due to the Cold War. Here are some artifacts from the 1960s. 1964 Mustang, the first of the world-famous American muscle car by Ford. Mustang launched in 1964 to fight the Plymouth Barracuda and stuck over the years as one of the most successful cars in the United States. American flag with a peace sign. The Tet Offensive was an easy victory for the United States in the Vietnam War. However, photos from the win were shaped into a slaughter and started a huge protest in the US, which caused the famous peace sign to promote anti-war messages. Another one is the M16. Starting as an early stage AR-15 rifle, the M16 was modified as a standard soldier weapon. This weapon is a symbol of the Vietnam War and was very commonly used among almost all soldiers. Although it started with a lot of jamming issues, it was solved over time and has now continued to be used by soldiers today. Hey, speaking of M16s, how was it made? Along with, I don't know, rocket ships? Yeah. Well, let's start with the M16 assault rifle. It is a sort of cheaper version of the AR-15 mass-produced for the Vietnam War. It had many issues such as jamming and backfiring, which caused many issues but was later developed to be more advanced and is still used by the military today. How about rocket ships, huh? The V-2 missile was created in 1942 in Germany and was the first official rocket. However, the first rocket ever launched into space was the Sputnik in 1957 by the USSR. This made development for the US space program to jump and eventually led to the Apollo 11 on the Saturn V rocket. Speaking of rockets and all that nonsense, let's talk about the exploration. Where did we explore in the 60s? Well, I'll tell you, nowhere on Earth but the moon. The Soviet Union took the first pictures of the far side of the moon in 1959, which inspired the space race, which was a larger part of the Cold War. First landing the Apollo 11 with Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin on July 20th, 1969. On May 25th, 1961, JFK proposed the idea as a national goal. Why did they explore the moon in the first place? Who ordered it? How do I do good segues? Who are three political figures? Let's start with Nikita Khrushchev. The leader of the Soviet Union from 1953 to 1964, Nikita Khrushchev was a leader and a promoter of the Communist Party, and was a big contributor to the Cold War. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. is one of the most important people in African American history. His March on Washington and the I Have a Dream speech helped stop racism in America. He was assassinated in Memphis, Tennessee on April 4th, 1968. Elected president in 1961, John F. Kennedy is known as one of the most popular presidents of all time for his involvement in ordering NASA to explore the moon and how he dealt with the Cuban Missile Crisis and his assassination in 1963 by Lee Harvey Oswald in Dallas, Texas on November 22nd, 1963. Well, since we covered it a bit already, let's go over the Cuban Missile Crisis. When a U.S. plane passing over Cuba took some pictures of USSR heavy-grade missiles, everyone kind of panicked. This was the closest the U.S. and USSR came to going to a full nuclear war. JFK passed a trade embargo to stop the USSR supplying Cuba with heavy-grade weapons. The USSR just kind of stopped without a fight, but they did force the U.S. to take their nukes out of Turkey, which the U.S. did comply to. Next, we're going over to the Middle East with the Six-Day War in Egypt and Israel. What essentially happened was Egypt hated the Israelis, so they blocked their trade. Israel, in this like civilized gentleman, and absolutely decimated Egypt with constant airstrikes and mobile ground troops moving in on Egypt and the West Bank. 6 days later, they signed a peace treaty, and that's the end of that. Finally, we have the most famous of them, the Vietnam War. Ho Chi Minh rebelled against the French-occupied Vietnam, which resulted in a splitting of the country. The North Viet Cong was communist, and the South Vietnam was capitalist, fighting against the more powerful North. Lyndon B. Johnson sent many troops over to assist the South, which resulted in us getting just absolutely destroyed due to the jungle terrain and unethical trap tactics used by the Viet Cong soldiers. Many people protested the war after the Tet Offensive and resulted in many anti-war songs, which resonated with the most popular aspect of the 1960s, the music. There are two big music genres in the 1960s, and that's country and rock. Country has been around for a long time. However, starting at the beginning of 1960, Marty Robbins became the first country artist to win a Grammy for his song El Paso. Then came the rise of many others. Ray Charles dazzled everyone with the song I Got a Woman, and Bob Dylan just absolutely swept the world with his fantastic music. Working with him was the man in black himself, Johnny Cash, in his tune of Folsom Prison, Fiery Rings, and Walking Lines. He was joined by his lovely wife, June Carter, touring prisons together and singing songs such as Jackson. Let's move over to rock now. Bob Dylan dipped his toes into the rock genre as well. Joining him were the talents of musicians such as The Animals, The Kinks, Creedence Clearwater Revival, and more. Jimi Hendrix changed the genre itself with his band called The Jimi Hendrix Experience. He brought hard rock to the general public with albums such as Are You Experienced?, Axes, Bold as Love, and Electric Ladyland, which all made it into the top 100 on the Rolling Stones list of 500 greatest albums of all time, earning him a place in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Speaking of the Rolling Stones, the 60s was a shining example of what they could do. Satisfaction, Sympathy for the Devil, Give Me Shelter, and Painted Black all came out in the same decade, and they were all amazing feats by the band. Perhaps the most recognizable, however, was the Beatles. They made a huge splash when they formed their band in the beginning of the decade. This is made clear by what happened as a result. Charles Manson drew inspiration from music by the Beatles, one song in particular called Helter Skelter from the album The Beatles, which is also known as the White Album, made Manson believe that there was to be a race war. There would be a divide between what he deemed the racist whites and the non-racist whites, effectively eliminating the white man. While he was giving speeches about this, people around him fell for his persuasive way of speaking. This caused a cult following of sorts, which came to be known as the Manson family. After the murder of Bernard Crowe in July of 1969, things only went downhill. 9 more murders occurred that year, and it had been more than obvious that the Manson family was forced to be reckoned with, a religion in their eyes. Hey, Andy Warhol, not much to say about him actually. He's a bit of an art guy. Here's some of his works. He made soup cans. Let's move it on to theater. Theater in the 1960s wasn't all that big. A few of the great ones were Night of the Iguana by Tennessee Williams and Wait Until Dark by Frederick Knott. The real big boy was the growing movies and TV industry, though. TV took a huge launch in the 1960s. Now, in color as a mainstream public commodity, many more movies and TV shows were created, such as Star Trek, Doctor Who, and The Twilight Zone. The movie industry also took off with such films as 007 Dr. No, Lawrence of Arabia, 2001 A Space Odyssey, and a huge hit with Western movies. Most by Clint Eastwood with his spaghetti Western flicks such as Good, Bad, and Ugly, Fistful of Dollars, and A Few Dollars More. That's not to say that his westerns were the only ones, though. Once Upon a Time in the West and Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid are still 2 of the greatest western films of all time. Let's move on to books and literature. The 1960s saw the light of 2 great literary pieces. To Kill a Mockingbird, which has continued to be taught in schools to this day, and one of the greatest books of all time. Green Eggs and Ham by Dr. Seuss. A tale of this guy who refuses to eat his green eggs and ham. Dude, come on, just try him. I mean, he does. He likes them. Eat your food, dude. Whoa, speaking of food, what are some food made in the 1960s? Let me tell you. Listen, Conrad Agui, this was a dude who owned a Swiss shop in New York and decided to create this liquid chocolate stuff. And it just took off in what is known today as fondue. Also, salad was made. Put ranch in it. He had some, carrots. You like carrots in your salad? I like carrots in my salad. Next. A lot of clothing was very similar to the 1950s. Leather jackets, faded jeans, Converse sneakers, and slim-fitting suits with skinny ties were all included in the men's fashion in the 1960s, while women wore more childlike clothing, like miniskirts and tight-fitting clothes that were usually purchased from the children's section, all of which often had ribbons, lace, or similar characteristics. Health and medicine. Some of the advances in the field of medicine at this time were more quality of life based. Things such as breast implants and contacts were not necessary for everyday life, but gave you the option, because that's just what America is all about. Housing, I mean, you got your basic houses, very similar to the 50s, just like clothes. You got your wood walls, small TVs in the living room, basically modern US houses just with different decor. You got your carpets, your wallpaper and whatnot, your garage doors, and that's pretty much it.